welcome aboard. Thank you for joining me on Inside Edge. And as we've talked offline, the whole concept of what I'm hoping to do today is to get inside the mind of Mollie Carmichael. And you and I have known each other a long time, but you're doing some spectacular things in our industry. And what I want to ultimately pull out is, what are some of those things? What are you finding? And also some takeaways for whomever is reading this, listening to it, watching it, however it is. Is that fair enough?
Sure. I'm excited.
All right.
Great to be with you, Tim.
It is so good to have you here. So Mollie, I get a chance to introduce you often, and I will introduce you this way. You're one of the bright spots in the industry when it comes to a brain, when it comes to a personality, when it comes to the kindness that you bring to our industry. But let's take it from your side.
Yeah.
How did you break in to this industry? And then how did you end up with us at Zonda?
Great question. That's like a 3-hour discussion, but I'm going to give you the short version.
Right.
Started extremely young at the beginning of my career. I virtually was an intern for the Irvine company. I couldn't have worked for a greater group of people. I then went from that job into the home building industry, working for Pulte Del Webb. And I did that, frankly, because I wanted to be a better developer. I thought I would just go over there for a couple of years and come back. And that was about an 8-year plus stint. And nicely enough, the Irvine company did ask me to come back. And I did come back for a small stint after that, and then went back over to home building. So I worked for Lennar as well. And then I went into the consulting world. And so for the last, I think it's 18 years now, Tim, if you can believe it, I've been consulting nationally, which has been great. So first 10 years, of course, it was with John Burns, and it's been now over 8 years with Zonda, which is kind of cool.
Mollie, I want to state for the record that I did try to hire you at Sullivan Group back in 2005.
And had I known.
All's well that ends well. We ended up together 10 years later, so that's okay. No hard feelings.
I believe everything happens for a reason, and I've made great contacts, and there are great. I'm the most grateful for working for great people.
I like that, and great people are very, very happy to have been working with you. I can say that. I hear that.
You.
So Mollie, you cover a lot of ground, and you work more than just in California or the Western United States. Talk about the geographic platform that you cover.
Sure. So realistically, what I do a lot of is not just consumer research, product research, master plan stuff, and it's really all over the country. So a lot of it has to do with strategy. And I would say the difference in some of the work that I do has a lot to do with understanding demand at the consumer sort of life stage. What do they want? What are they willing to pay for? And then strategically sort of mixing that in, whether it's a small project, whether it's a master plan. But I would say, uniquely, the markets I'm working in most, Tim, I think have a lot to do with more of the less conventional markets. So DC is an example, Denver is an example, the higher density markets, even in Florida, is an example. Texas is now really transforming, like Austin, obviously, Seattle. So those markets that are really moving out of what I call the traditional 50s, 60s, and 70s from a lot perspective, and they're trying to get more creative, profitably as well as product wise, with new solutions.
Right on. And as you think about how the world has shifted, I'll start by saying in 1982, when I did my first market study, we did the market studies on graph paper. Things have changed. Technology has changed. The way we look has changed. Talk to us about some of the things that have evolved for you and tools that you're using and ways you look at the world that are a little bit different than they used to be.
This is so funny. This is going to make me seem like I'm 102, but I'll never forget. That was probably my biggest advantage. Coming into this business, I was always very tech savvy. And I came in and they literally were doing graphs with stickers, right? Remember the grid paper, and they would do these graphs in it. And I sort of in a comical way was leaving. I was going to college at the time, and I, as a kind of kidding, like left a memo on John Martin's desk and said, "Hey, I think I could do in like 15 minutes what some people are doing like a week. Like, just let me kind of computerize some of that stuff." And I'll really help to sort of change some of that stuff. And David Kovac was another, just a tremendous mentor for me. And they were like, great, we'll take, part-time as you're going to school and that kind of stuff. And of course that evolved to like 60 hours a week and all the stuff that goes with that. But it was fantastic because I was able to sort of take this new skill and really help to transform the way we were looking at data and getting to answers fast. And I think that is really my talent today, because I can take a lot of data and get to answers quickly, as opposed to just copying. I would say, and I don't mean this as a criticism at all, but I think a lot of people in our industry will go, hey, go shop everything, see what's performing, and let's do more of that. And I think what we really do as a company is we have so much information at our fingertips, we can get to more. And we can look at the gaps, we can look at what's performing, we can look at what customers want, and then we can really get to new solutions in addition
Molly,
to.
I like what you just said about it's one thing to look right now and say what's missing, but the other part is look ahead. And some of
Sure.
our technologies help us. The new home source element helps us look at where eyeballs are for consumers. I'm
Yeah.
with you on that. But I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned John Martin. And for those of you watching or listening, I'm getting choked up. John recently passed away. And he was a mentor to both of us. Talk a little bit about John. And then also, for those of you listening, there's another thing to think about. Molly is the first recipient of the Tipton Martin Award, which used to be the Max Tipton Award. And she's the first recipient of mixing these two names. And John Martin was the very first recipient of this Tipton Award. And it's acknowledging people that have given a great deal, not just brain power, but time, energy, and love to the industry on the marketing side. So talk a little bit about John's influence on you.
You bet. And I could not be more grateful. I would also note that Tim also received the Max Tipton, so it's great. But um, it's it's a huge honor, but it was an even bigger honor just being his friend. I mean, he was more than just my boss. He was more than just a mentor. He was one of those people in my life that always made me feel like a peer. I always kid about this. Because he's been such a dear friend of mine. My father, who is a huge influence in my life and I adored, he was one of those guys who could talk me off a ledge and onto a stage. And John was probably the guy who always invited me onto the stage. And
Literally and figuratively. Literally and figuratively. Yes.
yeah, and what I love the most about him is, because this is how my brain works, he always wanted to figure out the next best thing. So we constantly brainstormed on what wasn't solved for, and we were always looking for what was next. I mean, literally, Tim, I went back to my voicemails after he passed from him and I listened to him. And my last voicemail from him was, I think we need to bring back this, this, and this. And we've got to talk about the products that worked, the new and so between you and I and his son Tommy, let's do a speaking thing on this. And he was, and this is at 90, that he was always, we were working on a book on sort of best architecture, where architecture could go. I mean, he just always kept my brain going, but probably as importantly, he treated me like family. He treated my family like family. And again, it was just, I never felt like I worked for him. I always felt like I worked with him, and his respect, friendship, you name it, just uh, hard
He
to
was
compare it to anything.
absolutely a bright
Yeah.
spot in our industry. And
Yeah.
you're not the only one that he made feel special. Everybody that he touched and talked to, myself included, he listened. And, he passed away at 90, and he had the energy of a 30-year-old. He looked like a 35-year-old. He was the Dick Clark, for those of you old enough to remember Dick Clark. He was the Dick Clark of home building. But just we lost a good one there. But I wanted to acknowledge him because I know he's influenced both of us, but particularly for you and with the award. Congratulations about that. Now, you said something that I think it should be our tagline for Mollie Carmichael's influence in the industry, and it's the next best thing. Let's talk about that from the standpoint of, you've been in consumer research for as long as I've known you. I've known you for 30 years. Talk to us about the consumer research that you are doing and we are doing, and then use that to look ahead.
It's a great question. So let me give you an example. So I'm working on about 4 master plans right now. And part of what the tools that we have, of course, are we can look at sort of supply, we can look at activity, we can look at how people are shopping online. So what they're looking at. One of the things I think we oftentimes miss is what's not out there, right? So what are customers looking for that they can't find? So our consumer research can actually go in and say, hey, I've always kind of questioned the fact, you know, what if we did elevators at XYZ density? Or what if do people really want 3-story and will they pay for it? Or architecturally speaking, we're seeing the trends go one direction as far as I'm going to say modern exteriors as an example. I'm starting to see the trends for modern architecture swing back more towards traditional. But the best example of this is when you and I are working in a market that we're not from, the first thing I get is, coming from California, how can you know the Florida market? And the best answer I can give back is, well, from the people that are shopping homes in your market. And by the way, we have over 1,000 people looking for a home, and I can tell you what they want next, not what Mollie Carmichael wants next. And we can get into the weeds on that. And we can also get into the weeds. We don't just ask what they want, we ask what they're willing to pay for that. And I do think it doesn't always give you 100% the answer, but it does guide you with better information than you had to begin with to make better decisions in the end. And that's our goal is we're not going to make all the decisions, but we're going to arm you with the best information you can to move forward.
And Molly, I want to stay there because you said something that's so important, and that is we're identifying what people want, but way more important, what they'll pay for. Because you know what? If you ask me in a new home, what do I want? Well, I want it all. But when it comes down to what I'll pay for, that ultimately is that's the rub. And when you look forward and you think about the way the consumer is looking right now, what are some of the buttons that have to be pushed? Because of course, price is so important, but there's so much more. And you often talk about this, but I want you to share it out loud.
So there are so many parts and pieces of this, but I'll tell you today, one of the biggest things I think consumers want today is they want engagement, but they also want privacy, right? And so when you're looking at different products, whether it's attached or detached or outdoor spaces, privacy is such a big part of that. And the other big thing right now is just affordability is so sensitive today, right? So with interest rates, more than doubling, and then you add HOAs and some of those things to get to more affordable solutions like attached and some of that stuff. I think at the end of the day, coming up with creative new solutions on the detached side, we can get to detached. Again, a lot of the research we do, we don't just use it with builders, we use it with architects to really create new solutions. But we can get to 18 to the acre on the detached side. We can get to duplexes up to 21. And when I say we collaborate with great, people throughout the country to get to those solutions. And I just
Architects,
think it's
land
really,
planners, the builders.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's pushing to that. And then I think, Tim, what you and I successfully do is connect people, right? Clients with, great, solution providers, fill in the blank. That's our goal, is to then make those connections. We also very much so run a sensitivity analysis on product. That's really important. I cannot believe how many builders and developers do not do a financial sensitivity analysis to understand which products drive the highest value per acre. Most will focus on lot value. We focus on per acre value. And that's crucial when you're planning any sort of real estate investment.
Well, and let's back up from that because that's the nitty gritty. That's ultimately how do we make the right decisions. But when we're in the creative part and we're thinking about placemaking, and I'll give a shout out for our upcoming Future Place event, where the whole concept is great placemaking. Talk to us about the tenets, the key things that have to be in place that are irrespective of location, irrespective of the buyer profile, but they're the drivers that make new place. Talk to us about that.
So again, really big, very different depending on what part of the country that you're actually working on. But that's really the whole point. Really understanding the placemaking components that actually bring value to a specific location. It is different geographically. And really understanding what are those key characteristics that actually add value? I've told the story a million times, but I'll tell you the shortest version of this story. At the very beginning of my consumer research career, I went in to do a focus group, and I thought these people were going to kill me because this neighborhood was so sparse. But long story short, they thanked me for an hour and a half because they were just striving for affordability. Now, fast forward that I'm coming from the Irvine company that, they're selling homes at $20 million a home. And so it was just this wildly different thing. And it was the very first time early in my career that I realized I really better understand the location I'm designing for, who they are and what they value and what they can afford, and then give them what they want. And so in some cases, that is going to be amenities. General rule of thumb, you're going to spend about 1% to 2% in cost for amenities. You should get back 7, and depending on which CEO you're arguing with, it could be as much as 20%. It's really more like 10. But understanding the value by amenity that consumers will pay for on a monthly basis. So as an example, a pool, right? It's a very popular searched feature on New Home Source is, do they have a pool?
Yep.
But I will tell you, 92% want a community with a pool and 15% use it when they move into that community. It still means they're looking for a pool before they buy, right? So I've had developers say, yes, but only 15% use it, so we're not going to do a pool. And my response back is, but if it determines whether they buy with you or not, does that make the difference? Because we want to understand what motivates them to purchase, and then how they use it and when they use it and how often they use it, right? So all those things I think play a part. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I'm going to stay there with my own spin on this because my dad used to say to have a happy life, you need someone to love, you need something to do, and you need something to look forward to. So if you think about it, that's a driver for
I
placement.
love that.
Because someone to love, you want your family nearby.
Of course.
Something to do, you want activities, indoor, outdoor, retail. And then something to look forward to. Well, it could be physically, we have a larger community that's on its way, but also from a value standpoint, because I'm in this planned community. I'm in this place where so much investment has been made. There's an upward potential for it. And I think that's key for us to find.
Agreed. And that's where life stage really comes into play. Because if I'm single, married, have young kids, older children, my children have moved out, the answer for community can be very different, right? And understanding where that value is. And by the way, in Florida can be very different than Minnesota, right? And so really making sure we understand that we really can work in all markets, but it's with the foundation of how we do what we do with the resources we have.
Well, Mullen, it's a simple comparison. Think of a 35-year-old buyer and a 35-year-old buyer. One is first-time single, first-time buyer and single. The other one,
Sure.
third-time buyer, 2 kids married. On the surface, they seem so similar. Because of life stage, not age, life stage, the decision-making factors are going to be different.
For sure. And here's one thing too, I also really want to clarify. There's this assumption that if I make less or make more, that I want really different things. And that really isn't always the case. It's just what I can afford and what I prioritize that becomes different, that I really need to understand that core value structure.
You talked about how, I'll take a step back. I think the process that we go through for our research is consistent, but you made the statement that there's nuance geographically. So give us an example of, 2 planned communities you've worked on that are so different because of the geography.
Sure. Okay, that's an easy one. So let's go to Texas, and then let's go to California. I mean, they're pretty extreme, right? And so in Texas, you're going to hear things like, not just from an amenity perspective, the kinds of amenities they want, but you'll hear things like everyone in Texas wants a master down, or they want single story. From an amenity perspective, the kinds of things they want won't be nearly as, I would say, water centric, although you will still see things like pools and rec amenities and things like that. I'm going to just pick either Orange County or even the Inland Empire for that matter, right? Really just getting any sort of small private outdoor space is huge, Privacy with that private outdoor space is huge. Master up is actually preferred, not single story or master down. Um, You'll also see obviously variances in some of those different locations just based on ethnicity, and in some cases you won't. But the kind of product solutions are very different. And because the product solutions become different, then the amenities do too. So if I don't get that backyard, it is what's the grand backyard that we're going to share as a group of homes in this neighborhood, where in maybe a more traditional Texas neighborhood, you get the backyard. So I don't have to go to all of those things in my grand amenity. It's just different things that drive it. And then just stylistically, I'll always like Austin. It's just a little bit more artsy and culturally fun, and it, colors everything, and but yet they want it to be a very authentic Texas style. And Florida is an example. I'll never forget, I was working for a, a one of the leaders. He wasn't the CEO, but pretty much was driving it as the CEO. And he said, I want to take something from Charlotte and plant it in Fort Myers. And I said, look around. I want you to go out to lunch and look how they're dressed. They're not in penny loafers and preppy wear. They're wearing flip-flops and Tommy Bahama wear. Rethink how you might want to look at that. And he called me from a restaurant and said, oh my God, you're totally right. Like, we have to switch the whole theme. And you really have to think what's appropriate for the style, the vibe, and why they love that place. Kind of like the Autograph series does for Hyatt, right? They do this very unique, special thing there. You want to bring that into the kinds of master plans you're doing, and that's very geographically specific.
I'm with you. Something I would love for you to share with all of us is some of the trends that you're seeing and what our industry should know about them and how it's driving community design and product design. Because these are some of the things, that as we talked about Inside Edge, is the things you should know, and that's what we're sharing.
Sure.
Share with us some of the trends and how they're driving community development.
God, there's so many. And it really does change geographically, but I'll throw out a couple of them. I'm going to start with sort of an economic figure that is a little bit less of a design trend, but it is a trend that everybody has to be super aware of. And that is just a change in interest rate, 1%, it equates to 11 to 12% in price, right? So we have seen very, very deep incentives over the last year. And so much of that has been in buy downs. I mean, I've had quotes, enormous quotes of the cost of buy downs. So now rates have come down. There's predictions. Allie's the genius on all this stuff, that they may come down one or two more times. And that really will have a pretty significant impact on pricing and how we approach what we do. And I think positively, despite the fact we've got, some turbulence out there. The, second part to this, too, that I would say that everybody should keep their eye on is just AI and the impact to the economy. We have seen a very strong stock market as of recent, because I think a lot of people are betting on the impact of AI and business and all of those things. And I think there is some sensitivity there. But now and my concern is that we may be betting too much on what AI will do, because I have a great concern that AI could also impact employment and long-term unemployment, right? So I think that's something that everybody should keep a close eye on. That on the other side of things, as it relates to technology, we're also technology, I would say, excited but overwhelmed at the same time. I'm really seeing a premium for human contact. Less technology, places to disconnect. The actual, oh my gosh, when you look at retail, the idea of having a lifestyle experience where you and I actually get to do this in person together, and I get to like grab your hair, whatever it is, a hug, like it's just such a big premium today. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolve.
And Mollie, after COVID, it's become even more acute because we were separated for a period of time. And, the concept of being able to be around humans, be the human touch, I think it's more special even now because I think COVID pulled us away.
I'm so grateful when I get to be with people. Like, I really am genuinely grateful. The other part to that too, that I think you'll see when the market sways in an area where we get nervous about the market, people get more sensitive to being too risky on style, as an example. So look at all the trends right now. We're moving more to traditional styles, even in sort of the way that we dress. I think we're starting to see some of the sway away from modern coming back to more traditional styles. But I think the one thing people are still going to crave and will still want is that just indoor outdoor experience. I mean, when I even look at your background, it's people want that indoor biophilic that's always going to be there. And I think the attention to healthy living, focusing on all of those things, I think are super huge today. And then last but not least, I think we all feel a little infiltrated with all the things tracking us. I think privacy is a really big deal in how we actually serve that up, both in home and in community, and how we design all things. I think we want connectivity, like I said at the very beginning, but we also want that privacy, which is such a big deal. So all the rest of it, I think, gets very localized, right? So there's lots there in product shifts and things like that. I could talk about forever.
So, Mal, there's a word that is used so often when we're creating place, whether it's a master plan or redeveloping or it's mixed use, but this word is used and it's authenticity.
Mhm.
And Tom Oliver, who you know very well,
Yes.
with Oxland is doing a cool new community, which you know very much about, a two-step ranch. He and I had a whole hour conversation about authenticity. I wanted to put it up to you. How do you define it? How do you find it? And then how do you make it?
It's again, that's where that locational specific stuff really comes into play. Because what's authentic in Denver and what's authentic in Dallas and what's authentic even in Austin, what's authentic in Orange County, what's authentic in Charlotte, what's authentic in Fort Myers, or to hop over even just to Naples from Fort Myers, it's very uniquely that place. So part of that you're going to get actually from the place itself. And a lot of times that's why we do so much consumer research, right? We'll not only talk to customers that live there, but why do you love this place? What makes it that place you want to vacation so often, or what makes it to that place you want to now live? Even with the realtors themselves, we'll then balance that out with what drives the highest value, right? What's driving value in that specific place? And how do we actually capture some of that? And then this is a really funny thing to look at, but even when you look at some of the hotel experiences or some of the attractions within that given area, oftentimes they're exaggerated in those places, right? So you can start to see what those little pieces are too. Um, and then you can sort of bring and capture that forward. But I do think even just something as simple as the color of the sky in Northern California versus Southern California, color behaves differently. Exterior colors in Southern California do not translate to Northern California, but it has a lot to do with how that color works with, the color of the sky and how it resonates. It's funny, but it is very, very real.
What I want to add to it is history, because when we
For sure.
connect new development to something, the trees, the landform, the water that's near us, when we connect to that, that's real because it was here before we were. And if we
For
can
sure.
leverage off of that, and that's what Tom, as you know, he's doing that with the communities he develops at Oxland. He's very well connected to the history of the land. So I think that's a lesson we have to learn. And that's where I want to take you now as we wrap up.
For sure.
You have been working, for decades in the industry. You've been a home builder, a land developer, you've been in marketing, you've been a consultant, but you're a student of the industry. Give me 3 lessons learned about placemaking and new development that we need to hold dear and that embrace going forward.
Okay. 3 lessons learned. Okay. So I'm gonna give you the first one that was a huge lesson learned. And I would say this is geared towards the developer and the builder. I'm not going to name names for for privacy purposes, but we sold a large piece of land on the developer side, and we were paid very handsomely, more so than any other builder per acre. And the reality is that builder, the reason they were able to pay more is because they were able to give extremely low direct construction costs. And so it was a great win for those. I think it was like 700 lots. But in the end, because that builder was building at such a low cost, not only did it bring down the value and the integrity of that master plan. But it also, all the builders who couldn't build with those very low costs actually cut our land value by almost half. So when you're actually choosing not just the kinds of products that you're doing, you also want to understand how those builders align with each one of those products. The second lesson learned is exactly that. And this is a John Martin thing. That's also something I've learned over the years, which very valuable. Know what you do well, right? Like you and I know what we do well, but also know what your builders do well. So when I'm aligning and I'm choosing product segmentation, builder segmentation is equally essential to your success. So if I have a builder who's really good, but they're known for cutting incentives when the market goes, you're going to want to make sure they're not your highest end builder, right? The same thing goes with
everything gets compressed. All prices
everything comes down, right?
Yeah.
The second part to that is the first one I gave you, which is, hey, even though XYZ builder is going to pay me more per acre for the highest end product, I need them to play like they're the highest end product because their pricing is going to keep everyone else down too, right? So those play hand in hand, right? The last one is and this is probably the most common mistake I see out there. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it the most profitable, right? So do your homework, do the sensitivity analysis, understand it. Because it hasn't been done in your market, let us prove that out to you. If I will never bring a solution that I don't think you can do unless I believe it's more profitable and it's a better solution for that master plan. And I'll use that as my last example. I worked with a developer. I brought some new product to Houston. I told him he could make $32 million more by doing that. And I basically got the like, hey, keep your California ideas at home. And I said, and I smiled and I said, these are not California ideas. These are ideas to help you to actually bring in new innovation. Of course, fast forward a year or two later, David Weekley and so many builders started bringing in some of these newer solutions. It was really an affordable solution that I was bringing forward. That was a nice product solution. And of course, 2 years later, he called back and said, we need to plan the second half of that master plan and let's do it. Right. So oftentimes be a leader. Don't be afraid to, if we can prove it out, we're not going to make you go somewhere, that has high risk and not very reward. That's our goal.
Well, I'm going to rephrase what you just said, and that is the segmentation element is so vital, but it's not just product segmentation, it's builder segmentation and understanding the alignment and the strengths of each of those builders, because you've got to get a puzzle piece that fits perfectly. And I love what you closed with, which is prove the profitability. It's not just, hey, this seems like the right thing to do. We'll prove it. We'll prove it financially. We'll prove it from the market. And that's really the wrap up I want to share with you, Mal. As I'm listening to all of the cool things that you and we are doing, how do we know what a consumer wants? We ask them. And how do we know? It's incredible. And how do we know what they'll buy? Because we track it. And what are they thinking about? Well, because a new home source, we can now see what they're looking at. You tie that all together. That is how we prove profitability. So I think your setup is perfect.
And we can trend it to say, like, this is how it's changing. One of the biggest questions I get too is, well, Mollie, it's great you know what's happening today, but how do you know what's going to happen in 3 years? Well, we can trend and see where that mark is moving towards.
And we look at history certainly as a precursor, but we look forward because things do change. Sure. And we can do scenario planning. You mentioned sensitivity analysis. That's how we say if then. If we use this product, then it implies that. So the other thing is we're keeping our fingers on the pulse of the market. Are we always right? No. But are we always updating our insights? Yes. We're staying up on it.
Absolutely.
Well, Mollie, I want to thank you for sharing your ideas on Inside Edge. And as I think I shared with you, this will be on social media. We will share it on our website. We'll have it on Builder Online. So with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your friendship over the years. Thank you for being a great coworker. And thank you for all that you do. Thanks.
Thank you. And a big hug to you virtually. I wish I was there to give you that hug. It's been a pleasure, as you know. I appreciate it.
I will see you in a couple of weeks at our next Future Place.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.